mobility, etc. Okay, we are recording in progress. Got it. Oh, now I lost my show there. Okay. So we refer to all of the information and the material and projects and everything else that's coming at our employees as the fire hose. You know, you hear that expression, we're drinking from the fire hose. And it's really hard for employees to understand what's important when they're getting so much information from different sources on different channels, and they can't really figure out what's most important for the work that they do. So that was our starting point, is, you know, how can we make life better for our employees? And we have this kind of snapshot. We call this slide the poor Jens slide. And this is kind of the day-to-day experience before we started for our employees. So, you know, they're getting messages at the global level, and they're getting them on Yammer and on email, on Teams, at the division level, at the business level, through these same channels, regional emails or regional meetings or local meetings with their manager and their teams. They're seeing posters at the site. Perhaps we have digital screens in place. So all of this combines to really give this fire hose of information coming at our employees. And we really felt that, you know, this is not, it's not beneficial for them, but it's also not beneficial for us in employee engagement, because, you know, if I'm an average employee, I don't know where to look. Everything is important, nothing is important. Where do I focus? How do I spend my time? So that was kind of the starting point of the day-to-day employee experience. And what we wanted to do, and this is our target, and we keep saying this over and over again, this is kind of been our mantra over the last year and a half, is how can we reduce the noise and increase the impact? So all of that fire hose of information, how can we really reduce that and focus in on the really key, important information pieces, communication points that our employees need? And why? Why are we doing this? As I said, they're flooded with information, but we also know that they were unclear about our strategy, and that's not a great place to be. There's no one size fits all approach for employees. We really need to segment and target what we're doing based on where they are, what their role is, what their function is. And it's critical that we narrow the employee engagement topics for our people. You know, another phrase we like to say is that, you know, if everything is important, nothing is important. So that's why we need to narrow our focus. And then for us, being a really large global company, we're approximately 60,000 employees. About 20,000 are based at sites or at factory settings. We have, as you saw with the poor Jens slide, we have regional groups, business groups, country groups, etc. So we need to better orchestrate. How can we plan kind of an editorial calendar and orchestrate our communications and prioritize and reduce the volume, so that we don't have 5 global emails going out on one day or 5 business town halls happening on one day. So how can we orchestrate amongst ourselves within communications? That's why we undertook this persona approach. So we looked at where do we get the data? How can we classify our people? How can we segment them? We did interviews with employees around the world, more than 100 interviews. We looked at people based at factories, people based at site, different countries, people working at home, people working in the office. So you can just see that we took a really broad approach to the data. We also looked at our annual employee survey, which for Siemens Energy is called our Voices survey. So we looked at that data coming in from employees about how they feel about communications, how they feel about leadership, etc. And then we also have our HR folks, our colleagues, do a cultural diagnostic survey. So we looked at that data as well, and then brought all of that together as a background for developing the personas. So this shows you kind of our 3-stage process. We've been about almost a year and a half into this process now. And so step 1, what I was just talking about, the employee demographics, the insights, et cetera, that we've gone through. We've gone through step 2, looking at the metrics, the segmentation, the personas. For us, we have this, what we call road to independence, because we are still separating ourselves from our former parent company, Siemens. So that's kind of more on the channels that we have available to us in employee engagement. And now we're at step 3, where we're really drilling down on one narrative for our employees around content and messaging, looking at our channels so we get the right channel at the right time for the right people, and recognizing that not everybody needs or has access to all channels. So how do we make best use of the channels that we have? So that's a little bit about our journey. So now I'm going to talk a little bit more about the actual persona based on all of this data. So as I said, we're trying to communicate with a specific someone in mind rather than a generic everyone. And a really good example of this is, I always pick on my IT colleagues, and they know that, they come to us and they say, we need to get a message out to everyone. And I'm like, okay, what's the message about? The message is about SAP. I'm like, okay, how many people in the company use SAP? And, we think about it and they come back and they say, okay, there's about 7% of our employees who use SAP. I don't even have access to SAP. So it's an interesting way to approach the conversation, because then we say, well, why are we communicating with everyone when really there are a very specific group of people that we need to communicate? So that's what we mean when we say communicating with a specific someone in mind rather than this generic everyone. And a little bit about the purpose behind it. We want to shift the mindsets and the behaviors of our people. I mentioned on an earlier slide that we got feedback through our data collection that not everybody was clear on our strategy. And as a new company, we really want to make sure that everyone understands our vision and our mission and our purpose. We also want the persona to be actionable. And that's why we also, when we approach our communication plans, we talk about think, feel, do. Like, what is it that we want the employees to think about this action or activity? What is it that we want them to feel about it? And what is it that we want them to do? What is the call to action for them? So engaging with them in a more targeted way and making our stories resonate specifically with them because of the role that they have within our organization. And at the same time, it helps us provide insights to our leaders, who we know are a critical part of our communication value chain. It helps us give them the knowledge that they need to communicate to their teams at a local level, regional level, or business level. And then we also tie it in with our KPIs so that we can measure what we're doing. How many people did we reach? Did they take an action as a result of the communication? And continue to refine and test and repeat. So I'm not expecting everyone to read this slide. The text is probably a little small, but it kind of gives you a snapshot, one-page overview of the personas that we've developed for Siemens Energy. So you see we have 8, and segmented based on the work that they do. We've given them kind of branded names like the enabler or the creator. We talk about who they're made up of. We have a little summary, and then we talk about their preferred channels. Obviously, face-to-face communication is highly preferred, but we have people who are on the go working at customer sites. So for them, we might look at things like shift briefings or mobile-enabled communications, et cetera. So this is kind of the landscape that we developed, and now we're moving into implementation. So with our communications plans from employee engagement, we look at how do we target these audiences. And I have a few examples that I'll walk through. So for example, digitalization. Our employer data analytics and enterprise analytics, I think the actual name of the group. Anyway, digitalization. So they had a need to get information out to specific groups. So we show them the personas and we say, okay, who is it that you're trying to target? Who needs this information and who can leverage the information to take action? So right away, they were able to say, okay, we're not looking at our on-site manufacturing employees or our service employees. Instead, we're going to look at the people who are business focused, customer focused. So right away, we eliminate a group of people in the middle. And then we look at the channels that we have. So what are the channels that we can use to target these people? So we have our intranet, which in our case is called My Energy. We have Yammer posts, which they have branded with the hashtag Digi in a Minute. They're doing polls and quizzes and frequent touch points of communication on their topics. And we actually just had a really successful campaign that they ran in the month of December using an advent calendar approach, so that every day employees could log in and undertake an activity. It could be to watch a short video. It could be to explore something on our intranet. And then once they had completed that activity, they were entered into weekly draws. And so just like an advent calendar counts down to Christmas, it was counting down to the end of December and every day an activity. And then we announced the winners early in January. And we had really high adoption for that kind of targeted approach. And then I have another example where we were targeting the creator, because for us, that's probably one of the more challenging groups to reach, because they're site-based. They're not sitting at a computer like I am every day reading emails or looking on the My Energy intranet. So we had launched a new performance management program through HR. It's called My Performance. So what we did was we came up with these postcards that we then regionalized with regional languages, with our sayings, ready to check in. And we also provided them with a notebook. We did training at site, so face-to-face communication, where we handed out actual physical pieces of material that they could write their goals in, because they're not, as I said, not sitting at a computer screen. And then we reinforce that with the DES screens, that stands for Digital Engagement System, that we have at the sites, where we can upload content to reinforce our messages. And we would provide toolkits to the line managers to help them communicate with their teams. So that's just one other example. I'm just realizing I'm going really fast, maybe talking too fast, but we'll have lots of time for Q&A, because that's actually the end of my slides. I apologize if I was too rapid fire. I'm happy to go back to any particular slide if someone has a specific question. And Julie, do you want people to raise their hands, or what's the best way?
Yeah, we can do a little bit of both. I'm gonna actually, I don't know, should I keep recording, Heather, the Q&A piece, or should I stop there? Answer in the chat if you'd like to. But I would say if anybody has any questions, you can do either or. We can raise your hand using the reaction, or put it in chat. I'll start off. I have a question. You and I, when we were prepping for this, we talked about the whole use of the word personas. And, I look at it like segmenting your audience, right? A lot of companies have, and we even do it in IABC. We have the college to career demographic, the people in transition. So a lot of organizations, for whatever purpose, whether it's employee engagement, recruitment, membership, we segment our audiences. So I'm curious about where that term persona came from, and if that's something that's typical in your vernacular, and just what was the origin of that?
I think it actually comes from marketing folks, like external marketing. It's, I used to be in marketing communications. Now I'm in employee engagement. And it was certainly something we used in Marcom for our customer persona. So we would look at, he's a plant manager, he or she engineer with 25 years experience. He mostly, this is how old I am. He reads these magazines, or she reads these magazines. I don't think anybody reads magazines. Well,
I do.
Some people do, but this was like International Cement magazine, very, riveting material, but we would segment on the external side for our marketing. So I think I wouldn't say it's new, it's newish that in employee engagement, we are now kind of taking that terminology from the external marketing side and applying it internally, because there's just, for us, especially as a large company, there's just too much information. We really need to focus in on what it is that the employees need to know to do their job and be successful in their job, understand our strategy, understand how they contribute to the energy transition, which is our goal as a company to assist our customers with the energy transition. So I think it's been borrowed from the external marketing world, and we're a year and a half now into this process, and we're getting some good success, and we're doing better tracking with our KPIs, which is also part of the process. So we know now what works with certain groups and what doesn't work with certain groups.
So I'm going to get back to that for a second, but I'm going to go to the chat. How did you decide on the specific personas you used? And do you have a best way to access each audience that's your go-to?
Yes, great question. So we could have easily come up with probably 25 or 30 individual personas, because as we went through the workshops and the data, we would say, oh, but what about the guy or the girl who is customer facing, but in finance and, all of that. So the first thing we agreed was that it had to be a manageable number of personas. And for us, we were targeting 7, we ended up with 8, just to ensure that we got the nuances. So you want enough specificity to be able to target and focus, but not so much that you end up creating a secondary problem of, oh my God, now I have to do 26 communications. So it had to be manageable, but at the same time, retain enough specificity for segmenting that group. And we decided through, as I said, we went through, we did phone interviews with more than 100 employees around the globe. And we asked them, what's your preferred communications channel? What works for you to get communications? What doesn't work? Do you know My Energy? Do you not know My Energy intranet? How often do you go there? They were pretty in-depth interviews. That's my brother's dog. Sorry about that.
He has an opinion too, apparently.
He does. Somebody must be coming home. So yeah, we asked.
So
all
have you
these
found
questions.
a go-to channel that is your go-to
Yes.
for each audience?
Yes. So for example, the creator, it's their line manager. So they want to get their information from their line manager. And that forces us to ask the question, like, if they're building a gas turbine for a customer, how much information do we want to give them? We want them to have the information they need to do that job. For me, I obviously need to know maybe a different level of strategy because of the job I do within employee engagement. So for creators, people on site, it's their line manager. Surprisingly, managers said email. Email was still their preferred channel. Sales guys wanted everything mobile. They wanted, whatever it is, they want it enabled in a way that they can get it on their mobile device. So I know I only showed that chart with the 8 columns quite quickly, but there is backup data. We have a single slide for each of the personas where we look at what is their preferred channel. And I hope, Katie, that answers your question.
I'm going to get into Lauren's question here, but as a researcher, this is really good qualitative data gathering, right? I mean, there's nothing better than going out and asking your folks, how do you get information? How would you prefer to get information? What method of communication channel do you prefer? What messages resonate with you? I mean, all we have to do is look at our broadcast email we get at organizations and very quickly see, what do we communicate too much about and not enough, right? If HR sends out any more stuff about somebody's birthday, but nobody updates us on the business strategy, you can kind of do your own informal communication audit just like that. So Lauren asks, what sorts of questions did you ask in your employee interviews? I'm going to guess that you had an interview protocol like
Mhm.
maybe 10 to 12 questions. So why don't you give us some details on that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think I'd have to go back and look at the Excel sheet. I think it was probably 15 to 18 questions. We started by asking kind of demographic data, where they're located, what their preferred language is, how many years of service they have with the organization. So I don't necessarily count that in the meat of the interview, but as I said, what is your preferred communication channel? We ask them about all the channels. Then we ask about the channels we have. My Energy, how often do you visit My Energy? How often do you read the news articles? The digital engagement system. Do you have that system in your site? And if so, do you spend any time looking at it? And we had come up with an Excel sheet, and we provided that sheet to our regional communicators. So we're a matrixed communications organization at Siemens Energy. We have people like myself that sit in what we call the corporate functions. So I'm in employee engagement. And then we also have regional communication teams. We have 6 regions that we operate in. So we requested each region to do a certain number of interviews. Everybody was provided with the same Excel question sheet, and everybody asked the questions, or if the person preferred not to answer, that's fine. And then we actually worked with an external provider who kind of collated all that information for us and drilled it down into, okay, this is what is preferred by these people. And then they cross-referenced it with our employee engagement survey and with our cultural diagnostic survey. And then also, honestly, with kind of a gut check of our communications team, because many of us have been working in communications for a long time on our own team. And so to say that, the data that we got validates my experience, that validates what I'm hearing kind of anecdotally from people. And of course, the really interesting thing is that we were launched right at the time of COVID, like literally March 2020. We were created in September on the separate stock exchange, and then March we kind of launched the company with all our employees, and we couldn't have a single town hall meeting at site or face-to-face or anything because we were all working virtually. So we did all this over Teams. That's our channel that we use internally, Microsoft Teams. And as I say, this external provider helped us with the collation, because it was a lot of data. And as you said, Julie, a lot of rich data.
Yeah. So many people on this call may know that my background is in organization development. I have my doctorate. So, man, I would have loved to gone crazy with your data. That to me is so fun. So I'm curious to know how many people were doing the phone interviews. Over how long did you do that? The whole data collection piece.
Yeah, I think we had in total, I think there were 26 communicators. I just have to go back to my slides.
Oh, okay. No, that's good.
I think there were 26 global communicators. I was involved in doing interviews in the North America region because I sit in North America. So we had a fair number of communicators all doing the same questionnaire, and 54 hours of dedicated interviews. More than 100 colleagues worldwide were involved in ensuring that everybody was consistent, that we asked the same questions. So it was really, we did a training session with the communicators ahead of time, emphasizing that it's important that while you can certainly collect extra data with additional questions, it's really important that you ask these questions. Right. So we have that baseline, and that was done over, just getting the data through the interviews was done over a 3 to 4 month period.
Okay.
Just because they were each, I know the interviews I did, we had budgeted kind of 30 minutes an interview, but in some cases it was 45 minutes. So it takes it's labor intensive. It is a labor intensive process. Yeah.
And actually research says if you were to go and interview people with the same set of questions, there's a lot of debate in academic world about how many interviews do I have to do? They usually say around 16 to 18, and you start to see a pattern emerge in the types of responses you're getting. So if you had to recommend to somebody on our call right now who maybe doesn't have 26 people to help them do this kind of work, but they wanted to dive in and segment their audience, what would be some tips that you would recommend if you're a one-person shop or a very small team?
Well, the first thing would be definitely to find allies within your organization. And so for us, that could be colleagues in HR who were giving us access to our annual employee engagement survey and this cultural diagnostic survey. So you want to think first about who are the allies in your organization who can help you. So it's not to say that if you're a one-stop shop communicator that you can't that you have to do all the interviews. You can reach out. It's actually maybe an opportunity for what we like to call a stretch assignment for somebody who's interested in communications but doesn't have a communications role. This could be an opportunity to offer them a stretch assignment where they could maybe spend 2 or 3 hours a week supporting you doing these kinds of interviews. So, find allies where you can, ask for support and get help. And then also think about from the size of your organization, and this is more like a gut check, like I don't have the data, but if you've been in your organization for any amount of time, 2, 3 years, whatever, you could probably say, okay, I know we have 5,000 people, we have 5 sites, so I need to interview at least one person from each site. Or if you have 6 different business areas, you need at least one person from the 6 different business areas. And then I would look at the length of service in your organization. So I would want to talk to a certain number, representative group of people, less than 5 years service, 5 to 15 years, and kind of 20 years plus, because you'll see very strong differences. We definitely saw people with greater years of service prefer email or traditional style communications, whereas our new employees with less than 5 years of service were all mobile, digital apps. Do we have an app for that? Gamification, as we saw with this advent calendar idea we did in December. So you want to get your primary areas of business, your primary locations, and then your primary demographics. And look for help. I do, in my private life, I do volunteer work with some different organizations. And Julie, if you're into data, you may know this from not-for-profits that, the number one reason why people say they don't give to organizations is because they were never asked. So similarly, the number one reason maybe why you're not getting the help that you're looking for is because people were never asked. So find those allies and get your senior leadership obviously on board. Our senior leaders weren't entirely convinced when we embarked on this project, but then when we showed them that poor Jens slide, and we chose Jens because Siemens Energy is a German company. So, but now our CEO, well, for a period of time, for about 6 months, he was showing that slide to everyone. He was saying, do you know about poor Jens? Have you heard about poor Jens? Let me tell you about poor Jens. And that was our CEO going around having those conversations with his reports and with the leaders that feed up the chain into his office.
Yeah, I would say.
Oh, Carla's cutting out a lot.
Not on my end. It could be
Okay.
that one. I'm not sure, but your audio is good for me. One other question I have is, I think I learned early on in my career, thanks to GE, when you have the voice of the employee, people listen, especially at the leadership level, right?
Mhm.
And then you can bring back data, even if you're the single communicator and you go out and talk to 5 to 10 people. What's hot? What are you working on? How do you communicate? How do you share information? When you're armed with that voice of the employee, it really matters, because leaders don't technically realize that they have that disconnect from being up here to what's going on at the front line.
Yeah, 100%.
Shelley asked a question, how do you coordinate among regional communication teams to ensure consistency in general messaging? I'll tell you, at Allstate, we literally put out a brochure every year saying these were the key messages annually. I don't know if they still do it in corporate relations, but we had a brochure or something. This was a while ago. This was the 90s where we printed everything. But we had like our top 20 key messages. And whether you were in claims or sales or corporate, every town hall, every employee meeting, you had to try to touch on these key messages. So tell me how you guys do that at Siemens.
That's a great question. Thank you for raising that. So one of the slides I had, which talked about the why, like why are we doing that? And I'm just looking here because I have my slides on another screen as well. But so the fifth point there, which I didn't really talk about, was that we needed to better orchestrate, prioritize, and reduce the volume. And so the question about how do we coordinate with the regional communicators and the other corporate functions, that's all about that orchestration. And we've just implemented a new editorial process as of, for us, our fiscal year begins October 1st. So we started this October 1st. We have one editorial calendar for everyone in communications. So for us, our communications team is about 150 people in regions and in corporate departments. And we are all using the same editorial calendar. And we have been very, very specific. If it's not in the calendar, it doesn't get done. And we have a weekly editorial meeting on Thursdays. And so there's a representative of each region and each corporate function at that editorial meeting on Thursdays. And we look at the week ahead. And so we can see, like this week was it's already a bit of a crazy week. Like today, we were gonna have 2 global employee letters going out. And so last Thursday, we're like, okay, that's not gonna happen. So where can we move one of the pieces? We ended up combining those 2 pieces of information today. One was gonna be a letter, one was gonna be an invitation to a global town hall that's happening February 8th. So we ended up combining those. And that's the beauty of that editorial process and that better orchestration. And if a particular region can't be at that meeting, then they send a delegate to that meeting. We also align with particularly our colleagues in Asia Pacific, just due to timing, sometimes offline, outside of the editorial meeting, but everything goes into the calendar, external and internal. So it shows our LinkedIn, our Twitter, our internal channels, everything in this one tool. It's got a funny name. I think it was a German tool. It's called Scompler, Scompler. And it's been really valuable so you can put a card in for everything, and then you can see day by day everything that's happening. And if it's too much, we take stuff off.
Well, and Lauren can talk to this, but even IABC has an editorial calendar. Like if you know what's happening in a year at the business level, I like to think of it as a big table. What's happening across the business each quarter, by month? And now what's the HR activities that support that? Are we doing open enrollment? Is this performance management? Is there health and wellness? And then you can dive deeper and go, okay, across business unit, what do they have? Does sales have their annual meeting in June? And then as communications, we're the foundation. I like to say, so if you build your house from the top down a little bit, then as communicators, we can identify now what messages do we need to start working on to support the business upward. And that really gives communicators a really great roadmap. I'm trying to, this is my whiteboard and I'm drawing a picture here of a house. And I'm trying to talk about it, with that visual in mind, but I think that's great. So
and you don't,
go ahead.
Sorry, I was just gonna say, you don't need the fancy software. It helps us because we're quite a large organization, but it could be an Excel sheet. Like just, list your channels on one axis and, the days of the week on the other, and then color code, this is internal, this is external, this is social media, etc. So if you're a small
I always
organization,
use it in PowerPoint. I would just do a pretty Gantt chart in PowerPoint so that I had a 1-page visual for my leaders, because they have attention spans of like a 5-year-old. So you just want to show them a quick picture and say, this is how we're supporting the business. Now, somebody asked a question, Katie again, So maybe you have some employees who don't want to use your communication channels, newsletter or internet, and then they complain they don't know what's going on in the business.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
100%.
honestly, Katie, that is a segment in and of itself. Those are the people we don't pay attention to, and they're probably like the C player, right? Are they contributing? I don't know.
Well, we like to think
Our
of the, the big,
responsibility to make sure that you've pulled that information for yourself, or that's the whole pull versus push mentality in communications, right?
yeah, that's one of age-old questions we've been struggling with, I think, for a long time. But for us, we shouldn't let perfection get in the way of progress. So we look at, 70 to 80%, the bell curve, that big chunk of employees in the middle. And if I can reach them, that's great. We do have KPIs per channel. So for example, an email newsletter, we typically get an open rate anywhere between 65 and 75%, depending on the topic. So we're always trying to improve our open rate to make sure that employees are getting the information for town halls, because we have a large segment that are factory based and can't necessarily attend the town halls. Our KPI is considerably lower, but we have a goal to increase by 5% every town hall. And we do that with new engagement tactics, whether it's bringing in a guest speaker or an outside in perspective, a customer coming to talk to us, introducing new polling, all of that. But there's always going to be a diehard group of people that no matter how wonderful your communications are, you're just not going to reach them.
Those are the people that I like to bring into a focus group.
Yes.
And let them air their grievances, and maybe they just need someone to listen to them. Let them talk a little bit about, I like to move audiences from awareness and understanding to behavior change.
Mhm.
So have you heard the message? That's awareness. Then you measure understanding. Can you repeat it in your own words? And then behavior change. What are you doing now that you weren't doing 6 months ago? And I think guest speakers at town halls create such great business literacy for
Mhm.
employees. If you bring a customer in, I'll never forget at Sara Lee, where we brought in somebody who was using the back of the house product. So at Sara Lee, Burger King is, 85% of the coffee was Sara Lee coffee. And so you bring somebody in, or Jimmy John's is using Sara Lee deli and meats, and you hear that guy. Now we had to coach him a lot because the profanity out of the Jimmy John's guy was like, he didn't really, filter himself well. But boy, was he an interesting speaker at a town hall meeting talking about Sara Lee meats and cheeses at a Jimmy John's, and it was fascinating to us, not only as employee communications, but all the people in the room, all the people who dialed in from wherever they were. So I'm glad you came back to KPIs, because that was another thing I wanted to ask you about, is what you're measuring your success on and how you're moving the needle, and where do you think you can go with that?
So I mentioned I'm in employee engagement, which is one of the corporate functions within communications. We have another group called, I think it's a little bit of a funny name, doesn't really describe what they do, but they're called Story Cockpit. And they are responsible for that editorial calendar that I mentioned. And they've also just finished a comprehensive KPI catalog. So now we have one catalog of KPIs for all of communications. And so the KPIs are by channel. So for an email newsletter, these are the KPIs. Whether you're communicating internally or externally, there's different numbers there. But for a town hall, for a My Energy article, for a Yammer post, all of those KPIs are defined, and everyone, all 150 of us within Siemens Energy Communications, are following that standard of measurement. And I liked what you were saying about moving employees along that journey. That's what I was saying when we talk about think, feel, do. Just a kind of a catchy way to say it, but how do we move them from just hearing something and getting the message to actually taking action, to move from the think, feel to the do side of the equation?
I think the think, feel, do started with total quality management, and then it got adopted. I mean, the U.S. Army even uses that thing. I have a whole book back here on Think, Feel, Do
Oh, cool.
from a leadership perspective.
You'll
So,
have to share it in the
yeah.
chat for me.
And
Yeah.
I'm definitely going to have to share with you my dissertation because it was all about communication channels at Sara Lee during their transformation. Some of these same questions were asked, like, how do you get information? What do you prefer? And then the messages that really resonated with people was all on continuous improvement and values. It was just really interesting because when you put actions around it, it stops being so esoteric for people and it makes a difference.
Mhm.
So Veronica says Mural is a great tool
Oh,
for
yes.
Google calendars. Now I'm like loving Canva, and now I know there's things you can do with Tableau. So I think as communicators, we have so many different tools today than we had when some of us, I believe, started our careers. But that's what's fun when you have a multi-generational communications team. You're like, help me figure this out. Show me some new tool that we can bring to the office that will help us, because I really think infographics and some of these visual ways we communicate our messages, our business successes,
Mhm.
kind of resonate with people. We live in a YouTube society, so if it's not a quick blurb or meme or it just, people don't read, but they watch and they
Yeah.
see. And how do
I
we
just read a great article yesterday online about what internal communicators can learn from TikTok.
Mm.
And one of the things was segmentation, which is interesting. And I'll see if I can find the link to the
So
article
who wants to
and
do a
drop it in the
webinar for
chat.
us on that, on how internal communicators can use TikTok? Because honestly, I've been fighting some of these channels, and I think it's about time I just suck it up and figure out how can I use TikTok or YouTube to talk
Well,
to
it's not
different.
necessarily using TikTok, but using what has made it so successful
Right.
and applying it to internal
The idea of
communications.
it, right? How would you
Yeah,
design
because
it?
people think of it as young kids. I mean, I have teenagers, and I know they're definitely of the TikTok generation. But one thing I didn't realize was that TikTok had 5.5 million new adult users in the US in like the last 6 months or something. So it was unbelievable. I'll find the article, see if I could do that here while
Great.
we're
Before
chatting.
anybody hangs up, I want to let you know we will send out the recording once I figure out how to post it to YouTube and the slides that Carla used and whatever peripherals, like if we're referencing an article here or something, we'll make sure we attach that. So Katie has another question. Team
A good
leaders are
one.
consistently one of our best channels. Yes, everybody always says they want to hear it from their first line, but they're also overwhelmed. What strategies do you have to encourage leaders to be advocates? I'll tell you, at
Mhm.
GE, we had the manager minute. Man, did I love that thing. And I didn't even create it. It came out of like corporate GE, and it was emailed once a week, manager minute. And it was bullets, quick little things that somebody could take and share at their staff meeting, their employee, team meeting, whatever. But tell me, Carla, what have you used?
Right. I think it's really important to, like the last line of Katie's comment there, to prioritize. It's like the anecdote I started off with at the beginning about SAP, right? Or HR says we need to get a message out to everyone. And I'm like, do you really need to get a message out to everyone? Like, from my perspective, we want the employees who build our products are the most important employees in our value chain, right? And so we want them to do that best and not have any other communications that they don't need. So when we're providing information to the frontline managers, it has to be absolutely applicable for their teams. And if it's not, it doesn't go into the messages that we send out. It's taking some time to get there because everybody thinks their message is important to everyone. But when you drill down, it's really not. Like, even with my HR colleagues on the My Performance, where I was showing the samples of the postcards and the notebook that we did for the factory-based workers, they were targeting information for managers who hire, And they're like, well, we need to get this out to everybody. I'm like, no, we only need to get it out to the people who hire people.
Right.
So, you know, that real segmentation and drilling down on what's most important. For the people who build the product, it's building on time with quality to the customer specifications. That's what they need to know. Everything else, not so much.
That's very great. I mean, I keep thinking of how many organizations I worked that had thousands of employees, but at the end of the day, my audience might have just been middle management. You know, if I could just keep continuing creating speaking points for those first line managers, because we all know leaders communicate out to everybody, but when an employee has a question, they're going to go to their boss. They're not going to go to the CEO and ask it. So you really need to arm that first line manager group with the tools and resources they need to answer those questions and be a subject matter expert. And if you build it into your engagement survey, or if they're somehow on the hook with their own engagements and they realize they're not communicating, you know, a lot of engagement surveys have that whole category about manager communications, something to do with my manager shares information. Well, right there, you're measuring on whether or not they're making it a priority, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So we have about 5 minutes left. Any other questions from the gallery? We've had a few people drop off, but we had 25 people on the call today.
It's great. I'm loving the dialogue and the questions, and I'm almost glad that my presentation was a little shorter because I really enjoy the questions that are coming in, and I encourage anyone to reach out to me on LinkedIn if they want to continue the dialogue. And I think I just found that link, so I can maybe pop it in the
that'd be great.
Chat here. Yeah, if I'm. Yeah, here it is. Internal communication lessons from TikTok.
Oh, okay, great. Lessons.
Okay, so we'll cut and paste, and yeah,